Hello, I am Jake Collins, and this is the first entry in my third and final series of Knightmare episode audio commentaries. The law of diminishing returns holds true here. The first series of commentaries I did had 16, then the second series had 8, and now I'm just finishing off with a third series of 4 extra commentaries to fill in a few little gaps of some things I still want to say about Knightmare. So here we are with Series 1, Episode 3, which was first broadcast on the 21st of September 1987. Now, this episode of Knightmare is significant to me in a couple of ways. It's the first appearance of Merlin, who, as anyone who's listened to my commentary so far should know, really has to win the competition for being my favourite Knightmare character overall. It's also the first episode of Knightmare I ever attempted to do an episode commentary on in the first place, many, many years ago. But the reason for that, the thing that makes it particularly significant as an episode of Knightmare, still holds true. This episode contains the first appearance of Level 2. Having been blundering about Level 1 for 2 whole episodes with the first 3 teams, and indeed for the first 10 minutes of this episode, Simon's team, the third team of the series, is going to keep blundering about Level 1. But then, at last, Simon is going to become the first Dungeoneer to reach Level 2. And that was why, when I first had all of Knightmare on video at last, in the closing stages of 1999, and I used to watch it through quite a lot, particularly this early stuff, that I didn't know so well and was still getting fully to grips with, this is where I really used to sit up and start paying attention. Not only because Series 1, Episode 3 was the first episode I hadn't had for more than 3 years on the Paul McIntosh tapes, but also because things really start happening. We get into Level 2, we get some variety. It's a very welcome change from the blundering about Level 1 of the first 2 episodes. And oh, how often, as I mentioned before, we do have to go back to that blundering about Level 1 later in this series, when we should be seeing more of Level 2 and indeed Level 3, if the teams didn't turn out to be so rubbish. And indeed, at least one other point in the first 3 series, as we get into the third quarter of Series 3. As I've mentioned before, it starts to get to Series 1 blundering about Level 1-y for a long time, for my liking. Of course, this scene with Lilith is quite familiar to us if we've watched the first 2 episodes and are coming into the third here for the first time. It is Lilith's longest scene so far, and undoubtedly her best. Mary Miller does some wonderful work here talking about the catacomb bite, which some spiteful sorcerer has brought up here especially to annoy her. In many ways, it's the most interesting of Lilith's 3 appearances so far, as well as being the longest. A quick introductory transaction with David and the Ruby in the first episode, fair enough. Then Lilith's first kill of 3 in episode 2 with Maeve. And now we finally get her fulfilling the extent of her role by accepting the object from Simon, the lady's favour, the silk scarf, and rewarding him with magic. 2 spells in this case, and one of them is even specifically to complete a task for Lilith as her champion. That's the most kind of extensive role Lilith will ever get. a reward spell, Flare, and a task to complete with the Freezer spell. So I do like that Lilith scene and setup. It's interesting and unusual. Of course, the unfortunate thing here is that Traegard introducing the concept of spellcasting to the team, and really to us, although of course we've already seen and heard Traegard himself do it twice with Dismiss, does interfere with the Lilith scene. And it doesn't really make sense that Lilith is sitting there saying nothing, doing nothing, pointing at the serpent's mouth while Simon just stands there in front of her. All the time, Traegard is doing this lengthy explanation about spellcasting and dispelling. Lilith has said there, after giving Simon the spells, I'm sure Traegard, that meddlesome dungeon master, will tell you how to use magic just as soon as he can. But of course, loading the catacomb bite room for the very next room, the production team has then realised, well, Traegard hasn't had a chance to tell Simon and the team about spellcasting at all before we get to the catacomb bite and have to cast Freezer on it. So we'll have to put in a little insert at the end of that Lilith scene. So Traegard is actually telling them while Simon is hanging around in Lilith's room, which looks kind of rubbish on screen. And the way they correct it in the next episode with Danny works very well. Having Lilith say to Traegard, if you are still there, you may come and tell your young friend how to handle magic. Just this once. I will not have my domain used as an open dungeon. So then Traegard manifests in her domain and quickly, much more succinctly than he does to Simon's team, explains the spellcasting ritual. And that's much better, that's more in character for Lilith. Having her just sit there, holding her arm up and getting stiff all the time Traegard is saying all that to Simon's team. Yeah, that's really awkward and that doesn't work at all. Just one of the many things in Series 1 that does turn out to be a bit rubbish along the way as the production team feels their way in, and we all feel our way into the show. And there's definitely an eye on improvement, episode by episode. And indeed many improvements, such as punching holes in the Wall Monster mask, do get made as we go through Series 1. This scene in the corridor of the catacomb is interesting too. Obviously David Rowe's been told to draw these talisman symbols on the floor by the doors here, so that we can have a scene like this, where the actual physical talisman from the clue room is used to open the door in the corridor of the catacomb. The key to the door is not always key-shaped. In this case, it's candelabra-shaped. And there Simon becomes the only dungeoneer ever to use a talisman to unlock a door in the corridor of the catacomb, even though it seems to have been something that, as an initial concept for Knightmare, Tim Child was quite keen on and thought would perhaps be in it several times. But no, it's only there once. And it's quite a nice little concept, I think, taking the talisman and matching it up to the door. A different kind of key. I think it's a bit of a shame not to see it at least once more. I do enjoy it there with Simon. And now, at last, 10 minutes into episode 3, Simon becomes the first dungeoneer ever to enter a wellway and reach level 2. Of course, we don't actually see him enter the wellway, do we? The flare runs out before he can actually climb inside. Bit disappointing, that. But again, in the next episode with Danny, the promise of that will be fulfilled, and we will actually see Danny climb into the Wellway. And that is an iconic thing of Knightmare, certainly in these early years, the first half, seeing Dungeoneers climb into Wellways. So it's not at all wrong to feel cheated here for the first journey from level 1 to level 2 when we don't see it. Here we are with the first appearance of Cedric, unnamed in this series, of course, the foul-mouthed level 2 monk guard. And it's been a long time coming, hasn't it? It could have been, perhaps should have been, in episode 1, the very last scene in episode 1. As we know from the pilot script from Dungeon Doom, the unbroadcast Knightmare pilot from 1986, the last scene in that is this. The test team does pretty much what turns into David's quest in the first episode of Real Knightmare, with Olgarth and Lilith and the ruby, and the magic lamp to light up the Wellway room. And if David had followed the example of that initial test team, not that David had seen it, and taken the magic lamp and lit up the Wellway room and been able to go down the well, this is how the first episode of Knightmare would have ended, with Cedric asking his 3 questions to David. And that is how Dungeon Doom, the Knightmare pilot, ended, with the monk monster asking his questions to the team there. And then when they're about to exit that room, that's the end of the pilot. The monk monster as a concept has been slightly adapted into this monk who is rather foul-mouthed and guards the first portal of level 2. And goodness me, don't Simon and team just about manage to scrape 1 correct answer out of 3 here to get through? It really is a scrape. The answer they give to red fought white and white fought red, great houses fought while England bled, but answer as my riddle poses, who fought each other over roses, is Yorkshire and Lancashire. And you can see that there's some sort of adjudication going on in Lawrence Werber's ear, even as in his mind he's getting to grips with that answer, and comes out with, truth accepted, York and Lancaster were the truths I sought. They do blurt out very quickly there, Yorkshire and Lancashire. York and Lancaster was technically the correct answer, but yes, that is pretty much what they said, Yorkshire and Lancashire. They don't manage the other 2 riddles, and I think they should have got at least one of them. Obviously their history curriculum up there in Heckman Wyke wasn't the same as mine in lower secondary school down in Hertfordshire, being told all about Saladin. But of course, for a score of 1 out of 3, they're let through, even though Cedric keeps the grub. But as we know from other quests, Danny's quest coming up, Claire's quest in Series 2, a score of 1 out of 3 with Cedric isn't usually enough to survive. It's enough to go on, leave the room without him killing you. But in both those cases I mentioned there, it seems that a score of 2 with Cedric is required for vital magic, which Danny does manage to earn and Claire doesn't. Whereas in Simon's case, of course, he's allowed to carry on the whole quest with a score of 1 out of 3 because we want to showcase level 2, don't we? We want to get to Casper and Merlin and hopefully get down to level 3 and get the watchers really interested and excited and seeing some wonderful new atmospheric stuff that we haven't seen before. So yeah, having finally got a Dungeoneer down to level 2, there's no way. With a dodgy score of 1 out of 3, they're not going to be allowed to carry on and complete the level. Even though I think in normal other circumstances, a score of 1 out of 3 with Cedric means you miss some vital help and you are doomed. Although, of course, what are normal circumstances on Knightmare? It varies quest by quest. In Series 2, Cedric really has absolutely nothing for Jamie, with a score of 3 out of 3. Whereas a few episodes later with Stephen, Cedric has loads of help to give Stephen. And, yeah, like Claire, because it's kind of a rehash of Claire's quest, as I mentioned before, that help from Cedric was vital there. So, normal circumstances on Knightmare, they don't really exist, do they? But the fact remains, in Claire's quest and Danny's quest, a score of 2 with Cedric was necessary for vital magic. Here, it's not. With Simon, Cedric takes the grub. Don't worry, in the next room there's an apple anyway. Simon can carry on, take Casper and the pills, and showcase some more level 2 for us. And here they are showcasing the moving keyhole trick. The first of 2 appearances for this challenge, this use of the 5-door room here. And this appearance, as I've mentioned before, is far better than its appearance in 2 episodes' time with Danny. It's an awkward little trick. But it works here because Simon is tall enough to reach the lock with Casper, and he does what I really think is the trick, the key to succeeding there. Stand in the middle and wait by the middle door until the lock flashes there, and then hold the key up, because in that particular door, the keyhole appears twice in a row. So once it's appeared in the middle door once, you can go, aha, it's coming again, hold up, Casper, there it is, and through you go. And that, more by luck than judgment, is what Simon's team has managed to do there. As I say, I do think that is the key to the moving keyhole trick. Watch, wait, hold up when it appears in the middle. I don't think Lawrence Werber as Casper realises this. In both cases, he's starting to try to get the Dungeoneer to chase the thing around, which is really awkward to listen to and watch, and is utterly impractical. In this episode, it doesn't really matter. But with Danny, it matters a tremendous amount. It creates a horribly awkward scene, trying to get Danny to move, to chase the keyhole. Go on, quick! No, it's never going to work, is it, Casper? So really, that appearance of the moving keyhole with Simon is the one I can really bear to watch. And here we are with the first appearance of John Woodnut as Merlin. Wonderful stuff. I've mentioned many times how much I love Merlin, his role in the quest, his significance in the quest at this point in level 2, and the atmosphere of this, the Hall of Folly here in Series 1. That is Merlin at his very best for me. Some quite odd first words from him there, when I was making puzzles for the iShield fanzine about characters' first words and last words. Sometimes it's quite obvious who's saying these things, sometimes it's a bit more obscure. Merlin's last words in the final episode of Series 4, "Do the honours, will you, Dungeon Master?" That's quite gettable, I think, if you know Knightmare at all. But Merlin's first words here in Series 1, Episode 3, "Dear, oh dear, what a splitting headache." Not that memorable or characterful from Merlin, and a difficult, obscure first words puzzle there, I think. But of course that links into this strange thing they do with Merlin in this series, or at least with Simon and Danny, which is that the other object you take, along with Casper, is Merlin's. It's for Merlin. You stick it down on the M puzzle in front of you because he says it's his and he wants it. Well, that's a good start to coming into the Hall of Folly and pleasing Merlin, but you must do better, and then come the 3 riddles. Strange that, isn't it? Surely the main function of Merlin is to ask the riddles and reward their knowledge once they've proven that they've defeated folly, their knowledge and their wit, with magic. A strange old use for a second object in level 2. Just pick it up with Casper and plonk it down in front of Merlin and then get on with the Merlin scene. That's something that doesn't happen in Richard's level 2 after having happened in Simon's and Danny's. That fire bell that Richard takes isn't Merlin's fire bell. Merlin doesn't want it. Nobody wants it. They've made a few adjustments there, haven't they, after doing level 2 twice for Simon and then Danny. Once Richard gets there, they tidy it up a bit. They don't bother having a weird object for Merlin. They don't include the really awkward moving keyhole trick. Well, of course, Richard's even shorter than Danny, isn't he? Only someone as tall as Simon can do the moving keyhole trick without things getting too awkward. As I've said before, it's a nice idea, but in practical terms, it is always quite awkward. And even with Richard's quest, they've decided about that level 2 clue room. It's too grey, make it blue. And then, of course, in series 2 and 3, it becomes very bluey grey. So as I say, Knightmare, as it goes through, makes these little adjustments, and Richard's level 2 does show some refinements, alterations that have obviously come about because of some of these things that don't look so good or work so well with Simon and particularly with Danny. They managed to get 2 out of 3 there, don't they? So they've got 3 out of 6 riddles correct on level 2 as a whole. And for that, Merlin gives them the 2 spells they're going to need for a coast through to level 3, so they can debut that for us in the next episode. Though, of course, they managed to achieve the practically impossible by screwing that up completely, as it turns out. Lantern and Anvil. That's another reasonably awkward thing about Danny's level 2, isn't it? Having to shove Anvil in there with Cedric to show us what it would have done. I was saying just now, Danny had to earn vital magic from Cedric to defeat Gumboil for a score of 2 riddles there. And indeed, that is ostensibly what happened, but it really was a reinsert of Anvil so they could use the effect and we could see what it was supposed to do, and it would have been much better used, better placed as Merlin's magic for Simon to defeat Gibbet. So, there we go. It's a work in progress, Knightmare, adjusting as we go along. But, whatever else it is, it's always a fantastic, captivating, enthralling viewing experience, particularly, as I always say, that very first time. Thanks for joining me for this episode commentary. Join me again next time for the second in this third and final series of 4 commentaries as I talk about Knightmare Series 3, Episode 16.